Risk factors that cause chronic illness and autoimmune diseases. According to Dr. 𝗙𝗂𝘀𝗀𝗍, Western culture views illness as something that only affects the body, not the mind. It does not consider how emotions can influence health. It also does not consider how a person's environment can affect their well-being. Western medicine separates the body from the mind and the individual from the environment. This is not only wrong, but also unscientific by today's standards. There is research that proves that the separations are not valid, and it is getting more advanced and profound all the time. But the medical practice does not pay attention to the scientific findings. The Buddha 2,500 years ago talked about interconnected core-raising phenomena. Buddha taught that everything is connected and dependent on each other. He said that when you look at a leaf, you can see the whole world, the factors that made the leaf grow, the water that nourished the tree it came from, and so on. This is what modern science calls the biopsychosocial approach, or it could be called the biopsychal-spiritual approach. It means that human beings have 4 aspects: spiritual, physical, emotional, and intellectual. We cannot understand human beings if we separate these aspects from each other. Native Americans already knew this and practiced it. One way to understand the biopsychosocial approach is to look at 3 examples. Many studies have shown that children who have stressed parents are more likely to suffer from asthma. In areas where the air is polluted and the airways are irritated, asthma is more common. But among those children, the ones whose parents are more stressed are more likely to have asthma. However, when you go to the doctor, they rarely ask you about your stress and your personal relationships. When parents get stressed, their bodies produce more stress hormones like cortisol. Because we are mammals, we are wired to co-regulate. So, when parents are stressed, this stress is contagious to their children. Prolonged exposure to stress hormones suppresses the immune system and makes it a perfect environment to create disease. In particular, if children are exposed to too much toxic stress in childhood, their nervous system gets wired to be even more sensitive to stress and more difficult to get out from those states, causing chronic dysregulated nervous system. When we are chronically dysregulated, we are more prone to disease. You can research adverse childhood experiences, ACEs study, or polyvagal theory to learn more about it. Quote, "The child is very open and can feel the pain and suffering going on in its immediate environment. The child is aware of its own body and can also feel the tension and rigidity and pain in the body of the mother or any else he's with. If the mother is suffering, the baby suffers too. The pain never gets discharged. The organism does not develop the confidence that it can regulate itself, that things will happen the way they should." Tilda. This quote is from Diamond Heart Book 1 by 𝗂𝗪𝗓. So, when parents are chronically stressed, children are too. This can disrupt the healthy development of the brain and the nervous system. That's why people who experience lots of toxic stress in childhood, adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, or trauma, are more prone to disease than those whose childhood had less stress or had lots of support from at least one adult in their family. That doesn't mean that people who had peaceful childhood cannot get illnesses because of stress they have in adulthood, but that those who had 4 or more ACEs have higher chances of developing autoimmune disease or other illnesses. By understanding this, we can help our nervous system to be less reactive to stress by practicing self-regulation skills such as vagus nerve stimulation and by learning to feel our emotions fully without suppressing them. What causes illness? One study that has been done in Australia on 500 women with breast abnormalities had biopsies. Before the results came back, these women underwent a psychological interview, and when the results were collated, it turned out that when women were emotionally isolated, that by itself didn't increase the chances of the lump being cancer. Similar if the woman was stressed, that by itself didn't increase her chances to have cancer. But if the women were emotionally isolated and stressed, they were 9 times more likely to have a cancerous lump than the average. The doctors didn't understand how 0 and 0 can add up to cancer. But if you understand the biopsychosocial approach, it is quite obvious, because if you are stressed and you can speak with your friend about it, you co-regulate with that person and your nervous system regulates. But if you are stressed and do not have someone to talk to about it, your body continues to be flooded by hormones of stress. Your body will produce more stress hormones to help you cope with your stress in expense of your immune system. Quote, Growing scientific evidence demonstrates that social and physical environments that threaten human development because of stress or instability can lead short-term physiological and psychological adjustments that are necessary for immediate survival and adaptation, but which may come at a significant cost for long-term outcomes in learning behavior and health and longevity. Quoted from article from Journal Pediatrics, the official American Pediatric Association journal, Harvard Center and a Developing Child. Quote, "If only medical profession understood the implications of this article, the medical practice would be totally different." 𝗙𝗶𝘀𝗸. In short, survival modes make us survive, but when we are in prolonged survival modes due to much stress, it makes us sick. What happens to our body when we are under a prolonged exposure to stress hormones? Stress elevates the blood pressure. It narrows your blood vessels. It makes you nervous and anxious. It increases the risk of stroke. It increases the risk of heart disease. Cortisol in prolonged exposure gives you more sugar that thins your bones, causing osteoporosis. Stress makes you more depressed, suppresses immune system. In understanding illness, we have to look at this mind-body unity, and we have to look at the relationship of the sick individual to their psychological social environment. Dr. 𝗙𝗂𝘁𝗸 has years of experience working as a physician in his family practice, and then for 7 years as a medical coordinator of the palliative care unit at Vancouver Hospital, where he was caring after terminally ill patients. He also wrote few bestseller books, such as When the Body Says No and Myth of Normal. He also has specialized in understanding adverse childhood experiences, ACEs, trauma, and addiction. He found that who gets sick or who didn't was not accidental. There are certain patterns in all the people that get sick with chronic diseases, whether that illness is cancer, autoimmune disease, neurological disorders like multiple sclerosis, ALS, Parkinson's disease, and so on. What those patterns were is a certain character trait with no exception that were causing more stress to the individual who gets sick. We can't separate the mind from the body and the environment. Here are some real-life stories for you to understand this topic better. Personality traits that make you more prone to disease. Dr. 𝗙𝗂𝘁𝗸 included a few stories of people with this characteristic. Donna had been diagnosed by the doctor with breast cancer. Donna is more worried about how she can support her anxious husband, whose previous wife died from the same disease, than she should be worried about herself. She says that her husband says that he is sure that she would not die, but she is worried about him and how he is coping with her diagnosis. She is afraid that she will not have the strength to support him. What you notice here? She is diagnosed with a possibly fatal illness, and she must undergo radiation, chemotherapy, and surgery. And her first thought is, how am I going to support my husband? It is an automatic and compulsive regard for the emotional needs of others, while ignoring your own needs, and is a major risk factor for disease. You heard the expression, the good die young. What we value in one another is exactly what kills us. Next is a story about a physician who died from cancer at age 55. He never contemplated giving up his work at Toronto Sick Children's Hospital during his illness. He was battling cancer for years and stopped working only few days before he died. What would you advise your friend diagnosed with cancer? Would you tell him to and go back to work tomorrow and ignore getting treatment, and to not think about your needs, and just keep working till you die? I think not. Automatic and rigged identification with duty role and responsibility, rather than the need of self, is a second major risk factor for disease. The next story is about a husband who has written a letter of gratitude about his wife who died from breast cancer. In his letter, he describes his wife as a peacemaker. She never had fights with anyone. She had no ego, and she blended into an environment. He describes that she didn't get angry with anyone. She didn't express anger. Suppressing negative emotions, particularly anger, is suppressing the immune system. That is a third risk factor. Finally, the last story is about a physician who died from cancer at age 72. Sidney had a special bond with his mother. He was a married man with children who had dinner with his parents and his wife and kids every day, so he would not disappoint any family member, especially his mother and wife. He had these dinners often twice in 2 households in the same day. He was a major people pleaser. He suffered from 2 failed beliefs. One was that he is responsible for other people's feelings, and the second that he must not disappoint anybody. This is the 4th risk factor. 4. Risk factors of chronic disease. 1. Concern of the emotional needs of others, ignoring your own needs. 2. Compulsive identification with duty or roles and responsibility rather than the authentic self. 3. Suppression of negative emotions. 4. Belief that you are responsible for other people's feelings and that you must never disappoint anybody. You never say no. These factors can affect our health by making us stressed, unhappy, and disconnected from ourselves and others. To improve our health, we need to be aware of when we are in survival mode and calm ourselves down by stimulating our vagus nerve, feeling our emotions fully, and reaching out to people who support us. We need to take care of ourselves and our energy levels by doing what we need and want. We need to be authentic and honest, even if it means disappointing others. We need to say no when we have to, without feeling guilty or responsible for other people's feelings. We have to love and prioritize ourselves first, so we can heal and live healthy lives. By Lena Kravitz, Knowledge is Power.